Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going over my Week 3 wide receiver starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. It's Wide Receiver Wednesday, so on today's video, we're going over news around the National Football League, then going into the matchups at the wide receiver position, then finally, my top 36 rankings to give you guys a glimpse of how Week 3 could potentially finish. Before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, help us get to that 10,000 subscriber mark, which would be incredible. Later today, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I will be holding a live stream, so if you guys want to come out, ask questions, I will be there. For those of you who haven't already, click that bell notification button to be notified when my latest content is out and when I'm live during a live stream. All right, let's get into it, shall we? Also, hey guys, Patreon link is down in the description for those of you who are looking to get all your 2019 fantasy football questions answered on a timely basis. Okay, so before we get into talking about matchups and wide receivers, a couple pieces of information that is pretty relevant around the National Football League. Number one, Cam Newton did not participate in practice today. That ankle injury that Ron Rivera was mentioning a couple days back obviously is relevant enough to where he's missing time. If, in fact, Kyle Allen is ending up being the starter this weekend against the Arizona Cardinals, sure, it could be an easy matchup, but any backup quarterback going into a week is not an easy matchup. It's always going to be difficult for them to transition into that position. But we have seen him in Week 17 of last year get some experience there. But I think all of the receiving options, including Christian McCaffrey, would take a hit if, in fact, Kyle Allen is under center. But moving on. Other information, Damian Williams did not participate in practice with his knee injury. LaShawn McCoy is looking a little banged up as well. So if you guys haven't already and Darwin Thompson is still available on your waivers, that needs to be something that needs to be addressed and needs to be picked up immediately. Any running back associated with that offense, no matter the matchup, whether you play Baltimore or not, needs to be on your roster because from what we've seen Patrick Mahomes produce, anybody associated with that offense is going to be golden in fantasy. Any other information? Oh yeah, Sean Payton came out and did not say Teddy Bridgewater will be our starter. So I don't know. Maybe they're going to run a little bit of a mixed bag between him and Taysom Hill in the next coming weeks. But I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Maybe they want him to earn the job. We'll see. And then also another piece of did not practice injury news. Devin Singletary did not practice today, so that looks good for Frank Gore going forward. And then C.J. Anderson yesterday was cut. It's absolutely hilarious that for 2 years in a row, after the first 2 weeks of the season pass on by teams that wear the primary color of blue and there are cats, the Panthers and the Lions, C.J. Anderson is cut out of the backfield. Hopefully, Kerryon Johnson has a Christian McCaffrey-esque kind of season going forward. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference, considering there are still other running backs in that backfield that could take some touches on the ground. But all in all, I think it's a good thing for Kerryon Johnson so that we don't really have to worry about that kind of talent vulturing anything down in the red zone. So that's always a confidence builder, in my opinion. But it's just interesting how C.J. Anderson got ran under the table once again. I swear, I'm going to find the clip of me saying he's going to get run under the table again, but that'll be for a future episode. Okay, those were the news little tidbits that I wanted to mention. Let's talk about matchups at the wide receiver position going into Week 3 of the fantasy football season. All right, here we go. Just looking at it, just giving it a glance. Okay, so the Raiders versus the wide receiver position, that's probably one of my more intriguing matchups that I kind of want to keep my eye out on. Considering they've lost talent at the corner and safety position recently, it's going to be very difficult for the Oakland Raiders to, in my opinion, stop the Minnesota Vikings offense. Besides the fact that Dalvin Cook is being used so primarily in this offense, 25 touches a game almost, I think going forward, this is a good week for Stefon Diggs and Adam Thielen to find the right path towards success. Both of them have been very, very underutilized, and their performances have been just garbage. I think Stefon Diggs had like 7 targets and only 1 reception this past week. The week prior in Week 1 had that hamstring injury that was bugging him a little bit. Adam Thielen isn't being utilized like he was last season. So hopefully we can see a shift in this offense going forward. Another thing, right underneath that, the New York Giants giving up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. We saw it in Week 1 against Dallas and Week 2 against Cole Beasley and John Brown with the Bills offense. in week 3, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have one of the best matchups, and I think Chris Godwin, certainly, which you'll see, and if you already haven't seen, is pretty high ranked. But Mike Evans, this is a week I'm still playing Mike Evans. I'll go over that into an extent. Obviously, he's not as highly rated as he was in the past, but I cannot see a possibility in which Mike Evans does not succeed in this offensive scheme in this specific matchup, especially against Daniel Jones having his first start on the other side of the ball. Other than that, everything seems normal. The Miami Dolphins are going to get torched. The Saints have always been bad against the wide receiver position going back to last season. There's good matchups here and there. The tougher matchups I want to avoid, certainly. But just looking at the bottom two, the Los Angeles Rams and the Cleveland Browns, their numbers are skewed. We have to take that into account. The Cleveland Browns played against the team that had their third-string quarterback last week. And the week before that against the Titans, all the Titans did was use Derrick Henry and Delaney Walker, and that was it. So obviously the Browns' numbers are skewed incorrectly. And the same thing with the Rams. The Rams in week 1 got destroyed by Christian McCaffrey, but then in week 2, when Teddy Bridgewater came in, there was no wide receiver production or even offensive production. So you see, you guys have to kind of take this with a grain of salt. It's just they're not going to be numbers that you can 100% depend upon going forward. Maybe eventually by week 8, like I mentioned in the past, these will be numbers that will be more solidified and give us more of a perspective on how a week can potentially go. But I always want to show you this because I know many of you are interested in seeing this. So let's go ahead and let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's talk about my top 36 wide receivers, starting with my wide receiver ones, the guys you can throw into your lineup and not have to worry about for the entire week. Plain and simple. Number 1, we have DeAndre Hopkins going against the Los Angeles Chargers. Yes, DeAndre Hopkins had a pretty rough week in week 2. Week 1, he was the number 1 wide receiver with an incredible performance against the New Orleans Saints. Had a lot of clutch catches. In week 2, Jalen Ramsey did prove his value and prove just how good he is against top-tier wide receiver talent. In week 3, I think that the cornerbacks, Casey Hayward, I know Mike Davis is out, but I know for a fact that the cornerbacks for the Chargers have played better in the past, and they are probably going to get back on track. I just don't think that this is the week to do so. I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be able to take advantage of this matchup and put together a pretty good, solid performance. That's why he's my number 1 wide receiver on the week. Moving on to number 2, Amari Cooper. Okay, I mean, it's just like Ezekiel Elliott yesterday, right? He is on the top because you play the Miami Dolphins, and I want to play everyone against Miami. As of right now, with Minkah Fitzpatrick being traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers, that does not help their defense whatsoever. Sure, they still have Xavier Howard. If Xavier Howard is going to shadow Amari Cooper the whole game, that could potentially be a good matchup. But I still think Amari Cooper, they're going to move him around the formation. They're going to feed him the ball now that Michael Gallup is out to 2 to 4 weeks of that meniscus injury. Obviously, there are other receiving options, but Amari Cooper is primary number 1. So he is my number 2 on the week. Moving on to number 3, Davante Adams. Davante Adams playing against the Broncos. He's Davante Adams. I mean, there's nothing else I need to say. Sure, he has definitely not performed up to scale in the last 2 weeks. They have been tough matchups, right? You went against the Bears defense, and then you went against Xavier Rhodes, who, isn't a chump, to say the least. So when we go against the Denver Broncos defense, who last week looked decent, but because Mitchell Trubisky is a complete garbage can, and in week 1 was getting torched by the entire Raiders offense, I really do think that Davante Adams is going to have himself a good performance here at home this week into a good matchup. Therefore, he's my number 3. Moving on to number 4, Antonio Brown. You're playing against the Jets defense. We saw Odell Beckham go for a bunch on them. We saw John Brown go for a bunch on them. And it's only right and fitting that Antonio Brown have himself a very good week. All signs point to him continuing to play. There hasn't been any official announcement from the National Football League or Roger Goodell saying anything about a potential looming suspension. Nothing of that sort. So for as of right now, Antonio Brown is the number 4 wide receiver on the week against a very juicy matchup. He should probably get more reps and be used even more this coming week. Moving on to number 5, Julio Jones against the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts secondary is pretty good. But I still am never going to leave Julio Jones out of this conversation of being a top receiver. Only when you're going against top corner matchups do I ever feel like Julio's anything lower than a top 5. So going into this week, what did he have? It's actually insane. He had 10 targets last week, which should have been far more. Only had 5 receptions, but has had 3 receiving touchdowns in the first 2 games. If we just go back to last season, he only had 8 touchdowns total. The year prior, only 3 touchdowns total. So they're looking for Julio more, or he's making more plays, certainly. But down in the red zone, Matt Ryan has found him twice, each of the last 2 games, which has definitely been a concern in the past. I talked about it in the 2019 draft kit that Julio Jones in the red zone has never been properly utilized, and they're finally getting to it so that they can make this guy a number 1 overall wide receiver in fantasy. Either way, I don't mind the matchup, and I think it's going to definitely be a pass-heavy game. Moving on, let's talk about number 6, Odell Beckham Jr. playing against the Rams on Sunday night at home. Odell Beckham looked good in week 2. Finally got himself back on track. The rest of the offense, not so much. I still think they're going to force feed him the ball. He is the playmaker of this offense, and he is the way that if they want to win games, he needs to contribute heavily, along with Nick Chubb. So going forward into this matchup, I still think this is a good one for them. Marcus Peters is probably going to have some trouble. They're going to have to put safety help over the top. Otherwise, Odell Beckham is going to be able to take advantage of this. That's why he's my number 6. Moving on to 7, Keenan Allen playing against the Houston Texans. Keenan Allen has been fantastic. And even more because of the fact that other receivers haven't been able to contribute, and Hunter Henry has been out with that patella fracture. I think Keenan Allen he's being utilized even more than he was last season. I think, what did he have? 15 targets this past week. That's absolutely fantastic. Obviously, Phillip Rivers are going to make some mistakes and try to force feed the ball to Keenan Allen in double coverage, because really he is the only receiver he trusts at this point. Outside of running the ball with Agholor, Mike Williams hasn't really done anything thus far this season, and there really isn't any other receiving options outside of Keenan Allen. So as my number 7 this week into a good matchup, I'll take it. Moving on to number 8, let's talk about Chris Godwin. I'm telling you, I even told you guys, this New York Giants defense is pitiful. I can't explain to you why they're so bad, except for the fact that they really haven't made any adjustments. They got rid of a safety in the offseason. They really didn't address any help, but they have Janoris Jenkins. Janoris Jenkins is going to be all over Mike Evans anyway. Chris Godwin is becoming the number 1 wide receiver option of this team in terms of targets, in terms of use in the red zone, even playing in the slot. Jameis Winston just prefers him over Mike Evans on a downly basis. He's looking for him on his first read, and going forward, Chris Godwin into a great matchup. I personally have to play this, so go for it. Moving on to number 9, Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay playing against the Eagles. Another one of these juicy matchups. The Eagles have not been good against the wide receiver position. We saw Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones take full advantage of that in week 2. We saw Terry McLaurin take advantage of that in week 1. So going into week 3, we have Kenny Golladay in this offense that is the number 1 wide receiver. We saw Amendola completely disappear. We saw Hawkinson disappear. Marvin Jones didn't do much contributing last week. And Kenny Golladay is the number 1 of this team. And going into this juicy matchup, I'm telling you, Ronald Darby's not going to have much to say. Even if they try to double him with Malcolm Jenkins, Kenny Golladay is going to have a good week. He's my number 9. Moving on to 10, T.Y. Hilton. Playing against the Atlanta Falcons. I'm telling you guys, there are too many juicy matchups right now. The Eagles suck at secondary-wise. The Atlanta Falcons are awful. The Giants are awful secondary-wise. These are matchups that I 100% need to play this week, because T.Y. Hilton, as a receiver who is going to take the top off the defense, and then on top of it, play in the slot and be able to take advantage there, and the number 1 wide receiver of his respective team, it's too good to be true. And I really do like this matchup. Obviously, we're going to see Marlon Mack be used a lot in this game because of how good of a matchup he personally has. But all in all, I think this is going to be a pretty successful game for the Indianapolis Colts. So Hilton's going to be a good play. Moving on to 11, Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins playing against Baltimore. Sure, Baltimore's good against the wide receiver position. But there were a couple notable things that I saw last week and in week 17 of last season. Kyler Murray and the Cardinals, they use a spread offense. 4 wide receiver sets, hurry up, getting on the ball quickly, quick plays. quick passes. Last season, Week 17, Baker Mayfield against the Baltimore Ravens did a similar thing where they went 4 wide the entire second half, and they made a roaring comeback. They weren't able to close off the W, and neither was Kyler Murray. Neither was he able to do so last week. But I think if they come out, the Kansas City Chiefs come out in a 4 wide set, they spread it out with Kelsey, Watkins, Hardman, and Robinson, they're going to pick apart this Ravens defense, and they're going to find a lot of success because of how good Patrick Mahomes is, how much pressure or how much alleviated pressure this offensive line helps out with. And because of the fact that their running back position has been pretty banged up, and this is not a great matchup for the running backs, it's going to be a pass-heavy game, and I think Sammy Watkins is going to contribute heavily. Jesus Christ. He's my number 11. Holy shit. Okay, come on. Take a break, Andrew. What the fuck is going on? All right. Anyway, so let's go ahead. Let's talk about my number 12. Let's talk about Adam Thielen. Okay, here we go. So, like I mentioned earlier, the matchup against the Oakland Raiders is as good as it's possibly going to get for Adam Thielen. This is really a gut check for this entire team. They didn't look good at all in the last 2 weeks offensively. Even in week 1, I think they got bailed out by not having to pass the ball more than 10 times. Adam Thielen, for a guy that was drafted so early as a top 10 wide receiver, has not proven to be so. And so have a lot of other guys. A lot of guys that we drafted early really haven't shown up. So hopefully this is the week where he can get back on track. And I'm hoping he's going to be able to do that against a secondary that is pretty beat up. It's only a matter of time until Kirk Cousins finally figures it out, because Kirk Cousins has been awful, and that's pretty much what Adam Thielen's biggest problem has been. It's not that he is not playing well, it's that Kirk Cousins isn't helping him get to that level of potential that he needs to rise up to. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my wide receiver 2s going into week 3 this season. Number 13, Michael Thomas. Now, you may be thinking, Andrew, you rated Alvin Kamara too low last week. You're rating Michael Thomas too low. What the heck? All right. Or yesterday, excuse me. Here's the thing. Michael Thomas is 100% going to be, his value is going to be determined by Teddy Bridgewater, Taysom Hill, whoever's throwing him the ball. The stat that I was looking at yesterday, when I went to the next gen stats from the NFL, Teddy Bridgewater in the last 2 games that he's played, he had about 30 passing attempts. He had 30 passing attempts on Sunday against the Rams, 17 completions for 165 yards and 0 touchdowns. I'm reading it off my whiteboard here because I wrote it down. And then in week 17 of 2018, Drew Brees had sat the week out, but Michael Thomas was still playing for a majority of the snaps. In that game, he had 14 completions on 22 passing attempts for 118 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Now, what did we kind of figure out there? Sure, they do not mind throwing the ball heavily when he is in the game. His completion percentage is decent, but his depth of completion, the amount of yards per attempt average for Teddy Bridgewater is not good. In the last 2 games that he has played, he has only completed 4 total completions of 10-plus yards, 2 in each game. Teddy Bridgewater does not look down the field to make completions. And if Michael Thomas is the receiving target that is going to have to go deep for a ball here and there, Teddy Bridgewater is not going to put it on him. He's looking for guys out of the backfield, the tight end position, or just quick slants, quick routes in order to get the ball out of his hands. He's very indecisive in his decision-making. That's why Michael Thomas is going to be hurt going forward unless Teddy Bridgewater can somehow turn it around. So that's why he's at 13. I like the matchup. It's not a problem against Seattle, but the quarterback play is 100% the issue. That's why he's at 13. Moving on to 14, Mike Evans. Okay, guys, if you've played Mike Evans in the last 2 weeks and you believe there's no reason I should be playing him, I've already traded him, so be it. I really do think this is a good matchup, just like last week, if not better than last week's matchup. And I think as long as he can just get one ball. I mean, the Carolina Panthers played one-on-one man coverage with Mike Evans the entire night. They put Bradbury on him, and Jameis did not do any service to Mike Evans. If this coming week, Mike Evans can take the top off of the defense, and they can hit him for a route in stride, he's going to score. This Giants defense can't stop a soul, whether it's on the ground or through the air. So I think the Buccaneers are going to be really good this week. And Therefore, Mike Evans is going to be a pretty good contributor. Moving on to number 15, Cooper Kupp. He is the number one wide receiver of this team. Unless Brandin Cooks is catching the ball over the top, it's just always Cooper Kupp all the time. The guy is just unbelievable, and the ACL injury does not bother him. He is Jared Goff's handcuff, safety blanket. I don't know what you want to call him, but as of right now, going into this week's matchup against the Browns, should be perfectly fine. I trust him more than any of the other receivers on the Rams as of right now. Moving on to 16, Stefon Diggs. It's almost the identical argument to Adam Thielen. Kirk Cousins needs to get better. This is a great matchup against a beat-up secondary. Stefon Diggs is a top 12 wide receiver. He proved that last season. He has not gotten enough targets per game, and this is the game to step up and prove everybody wrong. So that's why he's at 16. Moving on to 17, Juju Smith-Schuster. This is probably the toughest ranking. I don't know how good Mason Rudolph is truly going to be in this matchup against the 49ers in San Francisco. The issue is Juju Smith-Schuster just going to get double-teamed the whole time? Are they going to stack the box and just put pressure on Rudolph, forcing him to have to throw the ball quickly to anybody outside of Juju, so just try to feed the ball to like a Vance McDonald or James Conner? Are they going to force that? I think there's a possibility of that. I don't think Juju Smith is going to be completely eliminated out of this offensive scheme. I think they're going to try to feed him the ball because he really is the offense. If Juju Smith can't get going, this offense can't move the ball. They need the top wide receiver of their team to be able to get off of this man one-on-one coverage, even double coverage, and needs to make plays. Hopefully Mason Rudolph can sling it to him, but I'm not as convinced as I was, a couple hours before. As of right now, Mason Rudolph's a kind of iffy play for me, especially he's a rookie into a good defense. It's going to be tough. Moving on to 18, Tyler Lockett. Here's the thing about Tyler Lockett. Fantastic matchup against the New Orleans Saints. Got a lot more targets in week 2, which is absolutely fantastic. Exactly what we want to see. He needs to find the end zone now, once again. And he's a guy that 100% has a nose for that. And being able to take the top off the defense, we saw Brandin Cooks do that last week. And we've seen many wide receivers opposing against the New Orleans Saints defense do that. So I have the full confidence of Tyler Lockett this week as my number 18. Moving on to number 19, Tyler Boyd. 10 targets each of the last 2 weeks. A wide receiver that is being put back into that slot position where he is most successful. And he's finding himself some pretty good work in terms of fantasy production because of John Ross's presence on the outside and defenses having to respect his speed. Tyler Boyd is being given a lot of work, which is exactly what we wanted to see because of the fact that AJ Green was out. We didn't know if this was going to be a possibility, but it absolutely is. I can't wait to see what happens to Tyler Boyd even when AJ Green comes back because of how much this team is forced to throw the ball because of how bad their defense is and how non-existent their running game has been. So Tyler Boyd going forward into this Bills matchup, it's not fantastic, but I do think Tre'Davious White is going to be on Ross, forcing Tyler Boyd to pretty much get everything. Moving on. Number 20, Demarcus Robinson. Yes. If you are associated with the Kansas City Chiefs offense, you have to be respected in terms of fantasy. Mecole Hardman last week, if I'm not mistaken, in my Patreon rankings, I had him at like number 23 wide receiver. The thing is, if you're associated with this offense, and now that we've seen Demarcus Robinson play even more offensive snaps than Mecole Hardman in this offense, I don't care who you're playing. Doesn't matter if you're playing against the Baltimore Ravens. All you have to do is come out in a spread formation, a couple passes here and there. You break one out because of the ability of Patrick Mahomes' arm, and you're going to have a fantasy week that is going to shake the fantasy landscape. So I think Demarcus Robinson, a guy that if you've picked him up this week, you probably need to play him. If you were number 1 in the waivers and you have a stacked wide receiver list, you might look to trade him. But I think he's a good play until Tyreek Hill comes back. And until then, he's a pretty good play every single week. Moving on to 21, Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders is defying the odds almost every single week. I mean, the guy had, 31, 32, coming off an Achilles injury, coming off of one of the better seasons of his entire career. The first 12 weeks of last season, the guy was a top 16 wide receiver in fantasy. Absolutely fantastic for the Broncos, even with Case Keenum as quarterback, who wasn't playing well at the time. With Joe Flacco, it does not matter. Emmanuel Sanders is the number 1 wide receiver of this team. Played well against the Bears last week, which is a huge surprise. Played well in week 1 against the Raiders, and going into this matchup against the Green Bay Packers, I know they've looked better defensively, but it does not really matter. Emmanuel Sanders is going to be fed, and he's going to be looking for some good fantasy production here. I think he's a great wide receiver 3 if you can play him at that spot. Wide receiver 2, if you have to, sure. He's been pretty good in that spot, especially because of the amount of targets he's seen. But in terms of production, I want him as my wide receiver 3 in order to kind of keep me safer. Moving on. Calvin Ridley at number 22. A tough matchup with Julio, but Calvin Ridley is getting a lot more targets. A lot of the plays are being designed for Calvin Ridley to go up and make some pretty big plays. He dropped a couple touchdowns. Not kidding. He dropped a couple touchdowns on Sunday that really could have been huge for him in terms of fantasy production. Still had a 20-point week in half PPR. Going into this matchup, as long as Calvin Ridley continues to see more snaps, more targets, and Mohamed Sanu evaporates in this offense, the Falcons are throwing the ball more than just about anybody. They don't want to run the ball to Devontae Freeman. They don't want to give the ball to Ito Smith. And Calvin Ridley and Julio are their answers in terms of winning games. As long as Matt Ryan can stop turning over the ball, there could have been a lot more touchdowns. He threw 3 picks. Imagine if you get those 3 possessions back and Calvin Ridley just gets a couple more targets here and there. He could have had a huge week, maybe 30 points last week. But going forward, I have a lot of confidence in Calvin Ridley. Moving on to 23, John Ross. I did mention that Tre'Davious White was going to be put on him. That's probably going to be the likelihood of this week's matchup. But John Ross has speed that if you just let him get away with a slant, he can take it to the house. He had a somewhat garbage time touchdown last week with 50 seconds left. I think it was like 54 seconds left in which he, in which he caught a slant and went, I think, 66 yards for a touchdown. Garbage time, certainly, but it doesn't matter. I think the Bills' offense going forward is going to be a lot of garbage time. I think they're going to get put in pretty big deficits early in games because of the fact that their defense is going to be able to compete, and Andy Dalton's going to have to pass the ball heavily. And because of that, John Ross is going to be given a lot of opportunities, has seen a lot of targets in the last couple of weeks, 12 in week 1 and 8 in week 2. Absolutely fantastic. 20 targets, 2 weeks. That's exactly what you want to see, similar to Tyler Boyd. So I think John Ross in this matchup, even though it's not the craziest matchup in terms of giving John Ross all the help he can get, I think he's still going to be relevant in fantasy. So I'll take him at 23. 24, Marquise Brown. Against the Kansas City Chiefs, I don't see the Kansas City Chiefs being able to stop this guy's speed. If you let him, Marquise Brown can easily rip off for a 60-yard touchdown. But what people are often forgetting is that he's still a good wide receiver as a whole. The guy's, when you have to play 8 to 10 yards off of him, all he's going to do is either run a slant and then easily catch a 7-yard pass, or he'll just run a comeback on you. He'll bait you to run with him, and then he's going to cut back, and there goes a 12-yard, 15-yard reception, as long as Lamar Jackson obviously is accurate enough. But I think Marquise Brown into this great matchup against Kansas City Chiefs should be good this coming week. I like it a lot, actually. All right, moving on to the last group of wide receivers I want to talk about. Another Kansas City Chief wide receiver, Mecole Hardman. He had a second touchdown called back. Should have probably had a 25-point week. There's always a possibility he does the same this week as a wide receiver 3 this week, or a flex play, potentially. I like him. I think anybody associated with that offense is good to go. So he's at my number 25. 26, Larry Fitzgerald playing against the Carolina Panthers. The matchup doesn't bother me. If, in fact, this defense can stop Kyle Allen, if, in fact, Cam Newton is out, I think Larry Fitzgerald is going to get a lot of work. He consistently sees targets from Kyler Murray as the number 1 receiver of this offense. So going forward at home, is it at home? Is it? Let me check here. Yeah, it is at home this week. It's pretty good. At home this week should be pretty decent. In a closed stadium, you don't got to worry about anything. Larry Fitzgerald is typically going to be the number 1 wide receiver of this team. I know Christian Kirk, who is on this list, can vie for that spot in the coming years, but as of right now, Larry Fitzgerald is just his safety blanket, in my opinion. So as my number 26 this week, I like him a lot. Moving on to 27, Nelson Agholor. The way it looks, Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson are probably going to miss this week's game as well. So Nelson Agholor, who is pretty much targeted a bunch on Sunday, and a receiver out of the slot that is going to be utilized a lot. Outside of him and Zach Ertz, there really isn't any other receiving options. Playing against the Detroit Lions defense. Is it Detroit Lions? Yeah, it's the Detroit Lions defense. Detroit is going to put some pressure on Carson Wentz, which isn't good for Carson Wentz. He's obviously going to be forced to make mistakes like he did last week. But in terms of the production of Nelson Agholor, I think this helps him a lot. Being forced to have to throw quick passes to the slot receiver, whether it's Zach Ertz in the slot or Nelson Agholor in the slot, it's going to help in terms of fantasy production for a receiver like this, a guy that you could have picked up off the waivers this week and throw him in as a wide receiver 3. I like a lot. I like him a lot at that spot, especially in a PPR. Full PPR even better, because I know he's going to see a lot of targets, and the guy is typically going to catch the ball. Moving on to 28, Robert Woods. I'm not convinced about these receivers for the Rams. They're kind of sketchy now. You never know who's going to have that week. We haven't seen Jared Goff really rip it this season. I don't know what it is offensively. They've had 2 tougher matchups, but they really shouldn't have been tougher matchups in my opinion. I think Robert Woods has disappeared over the last couple weeks. Could find some resurgence here. Brandin Cooks is even lower on this list. It's just, I don't know, man. This offense is a little weird, and you never know who's going to really make that play. So that's why I have him a little bit lower down this list here at 28. Moving on to 29, John Brown, the number 1 wide receiver of the Bills. We certainly know he's going to get his 10-plus targets, and he's going to get his opportunity in this offense. It's a fantastic matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. To be honest, I might even play him over Robert Woods because I just don't know if Robert Woods is going to even score this week. You know what I mean? That's what I was mentioning. John Brown, fantastic this week. Should be played. I love him as a wide receiver 3. If you play him at your wide receiver 2 spot, perfectly fine. Moving on to 30, Brandin Cooks. Same argument. I don't know if he's going to make the play. He was very good against the Saints. He typically is in the past. Always against former teams, he's pretty good. But going forward against this year, like even against the Patriots in the Super Bowl, he was good. He had like over 100 receiving yards. Brandin Cooks is always good in his revenge games. But there's no revenge game here in this week. I don't know who's going to catch the ball. I know Cooper Kupp's going to certainly be there, but who between Robert Woods or Brandin Cooks is going to make that big play? Potentially both of them could, but that's on Goff to have to throw 3 touchdowns and 350 yards in order to make these guys relevant. So that's why they sit lower on the list. Moving on to 31, Tyrell Williams, who's dealt with a little bit of a an injury bug as of late. I think as long as he practices, he's participating, and he's ready to play, I don't mind playing him. It's just the issue of the matchup. Xavier Rhodes is not somebody you want to mess with. Has locked down Julio and Davante Adams in the last 2 weeks. Tyrell Williams isn't much of a talent in comparison to those two. He's not really in that conversation. So even with the injury, with the matchup, could be really tough for this Raiders offense to get going. Moving on to 32, Terry McLaurin playing against the Bears. Case Keenum loves this guy. He's feeding him the ball. And I think he's a player that, if he's not already rostered, needs to be and could potentially be played on any given week. Against the Bears, it's a little bit tougher matchup, but they are at home. And if the Bears offense struggles and their defense kind of disappears at times, Terry McLaurin could take advantage of that. Moving on to 33, Julian Edelman. It's too good of a matchup against the Jets. Antonio Brown's going to be fine. Sony Michel's going to run the ball a lot, but Julian Edelman is always in line for 6+ targets. If he finds an end zone, finds himself in the red zone and finds himself a touchdown, I wouldn't be surprised. It's just all dependent on how many mouths they have to feed. They have Michel, they have White, they have Antonio Brown, they have Gordon, they have Edelman. I don't know which one of these guys is going to score a touchdown, but I know that Edelman is going to definitely get more targets than a lot of these other guys, and that opportunity is going to lead to success in terms of fantasy. Moving on to 34, DK Metcalf, playing against the Saints defense. Tyler Lockett is set to go. DK Metcalf should be just as good. We've kind of seen this offense lean more towards the passing game, especially last week as soon as the run was stuffed. I think the Saints are primarily a good run-stopping defense, which will probably force the Saints to have to throw the ball, force the Seahawks to have to throw the ball more, and DK Metcalf against this the secondary should be fine. He's my number 34. Number 35, Christian Kirk, into the matchup against the Carolina Panthers. If they're going to run man on Christian Kirk, perfect. I actually dare them to do that. Christian Kirk is a speedster in a 4-wide set. If you're not playing cover 4 And if you're playing some sort of BS man, you're going to be burnt. And even last week I don't know why I'm fumbling over my words. The amount of production and opportunity he got against the Baltimore Ravens and how good he was just sets me up for more confidence with this guy. Eventually, he's going to get on track. Week 1 against that matchup, it wasn't a good matchup against the Lions. That's why he wasn't on the list. Last week, it wasn't a great matchup, but he got past that. They used him heavily. They're targeting him more comparatively to like Keyshawn Johnson or Bird in that offense. David Johnson kind of disappeared. So Christian Kirk had to step up, and hopefully they can continue to feed him. He's my number 35, number 36, the last receiver I wanted to mention. There are other guys that I'd like to mention. There's Sterling Shepard that could be good. There is a guy like Allen Robinson that could be good, but I'm just worried about their quarterback play. Mitch Trubisky has been awful, and Daniel Jones is a question mark at the moment. So a guy like Randall Cobb associated with that Dallas offense playing against the Miami Dolphins defense seems like a pretty relevant play this week. Devin Smith could be that deep ball threat that could have some fantasy production this week, like a Mecole Hardman or Demarcus Robinson of last week. But I think Randall Cobb is the safer play of the bunch, and that's why he's my number 36. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. Later today, live stream. Hopefully you guys make it out there. And if you don't, no problem. I will be doing a live stream Sunday morning before all the games kick off. But thank you again for watching. If you haven't yet already, click that like button. And that's pretty much it. Tomorrow we have in line for us quarterbacks, tight ends, Thursday night football. Should be fun. Thursday night matchups, not that juicy. I don't think many people are playing any fantasy prospects outside of Fournette and Henry. Like outside of those two, I'm not really. Maybe Delaney Walker. It's not really a great matchup. I don't even like playing players into Thursday night matchups in general. So anyway, thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.